So yeah, Dali is there. Hi, Dali. How are you?
I'm good, Ghalib.
Okay.
Ghalib, at this point, there's a great debate happening on the other side between by Mufti Yasir Wajidi and Kaisa Raja and all that gang.
Okay.
Did he have a
Okay.
chance? So they're discussing slavery
Okay.
in Islam. So now I'm discussing. So
I would be like, I think most of the mental gymnastics done by them would be quite amusing, I think. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So Dali, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So Ghalib, so I'm gonna go one by one on the points. So initially he defined, like, I haven't heard it fully, so I'm not respond like I maybe I'm missing some points, but so he started with the point of consent. He said that the definition of consent is variable in Western culture. For example, so one is consent in sex. So when you're having sex with a woman, so there are five definitions of consent by Planned Parenthood from America. So he went through that. Then he said that at this point you have so a woman can say no to sex. So that's one form of consent. But, like, for example, then if you wanna kill yourself, as an example, uh, like you have some disease and then you want to do euthanasia. So 11 states allow in America, the rest do not. And so there's no consent there. And then, for example, if a doctor is going through giving you a medicine and the patient is not ready for the medicine, for example, they don't want to take the medicine, but because the expert opinion of a body can override the consent of an individual, for example, on a treatment. So he went through a list of consent. So he said that, so first, the definition of consent is not static in the Western culture. So that was his first key point. Then he went on. Do you want me to go through everything and then you want to discuss, or you want to go one by one?
Yeah, but I think when it comes to rape or sex with slave girls, it comes down to the consent for sex. We are not talking about consent for assisted suicide here. No, we're talking about consent for sex. Two people having sex with one another, and who can give consent and who cannot. Now you can move on. Yeah.
Okay. So the next point was that when a woman, in the olden days, when a woman was fighting, when the war was happening, so and people knew that, for example, there's a war and one party came in and conquered another land. So it was known by everyone that was part of the whole group, that the women would be taken as concubines or slaves, or the people, and and the rest would not. And then he said that they could be taken as, and then he said that because that consent comes under, because all the women can theoretically say that they did not say yes to the war, but the governing body of that time, for example, the men, the leaders, had said yes to the war. So in a way, so the same definition of consent, you know what I mean, like the way the governing body now in the West can say, uh, you are, like they can override the consent of an individual. Okay, I don't want to take the medicine. Similarly, even in America, for example, in other countries, for example, in Russia right now, people don't want to go to war, but the government has decided that, so they can take people in, even those people that do not want to go to the war. They have to, because they live under that governing system. So though, although they were not, but because they are part of that governing system, they indirectly give a consent that they know that they would be captured as
So this
slaves.
is such a stupid line of argumentation that it's very easy to deconstruct it.
Okay.
So according to their reasoning, when Hamas declares war on Israel, it is okay to make every Palestinian woman and child into a slave and kill all the men. Or Hezbollah or Hamas, when they declare war on Israel, if Israel does that, then we would have to agree, okay, because they declared war on Israel, now Israel has all the right of,
Uh,
Israel has all to, make their wives and their children and their daughters into sex slaves and, maybe sell them or maybe use them as human, meat at human meat shops and put them naked everywhere and do whatever you want to do to them.
No,
So
no,
this is we are going to say that it would be okay for non-Muslims to make Muslims into slaves. Then Yasir Wajidi and this Kaisar Raja and everyone else, their eyes would just pop out of their sockets. This is how dishonest they are. This is
no,
basically plain dishonesty.
but then they're saying that the rules. I did not listen to the whole thing because it was getting a little too much. But then they are saying that I think that they're saying that the modern rules, like the rules of the games, have changed in the war now, as an
So
example.
the rules of the game are better than the rules that were set by the Prophet. This is what we say all the time. Because today's time is much better than the time of the Prophet. And today's rules are much better than the rules that were given by the Prophet. This is what we say. And basically, these guys are agreeing to what we are saying.
But then they also say that okay, the thing is that I'm not done with the slavery part because they said more points on the slavery part, which I want to discuss with you. But then they can say that okay, uh, but again the rules change by definition of time. I think they have a loophole in that the rules can change with time. Uh, uh,
Dali, this is basically plain bullshit by them. This is basically plain bullshit. There's nothing that gives me any kind of answer in this. There's no
oh,
answer in this. This is all just their stupid line of reasoning, and I cannot say. And this is basically a sadist line of reasoning, because what their
Someone,
prophet was. Haris, welcome. Hi.
thank you.
I,
Someone,
I
I think you're talking about the stream that they're doing to defend or somehow give
yeah,
apologetics for
on the slavery.
defense.
I was
Yeah,
listening to it today. So
I
I thought
listened
like
to a little bit of it.
yeah.
My hair are usually on point, so I actually pull them I almost pull them out of my scalp because the nonsense that they're talking, I couldn't take it. So I'll try to steal, man. I don't know how much you've told Ghalib, but it's so funny. So first of all, he said, so there's an academician apparently.
Yeah, a definition of consent. He
Flop,
started with the
a
definition
flop
of.
accommodation.
I
Yeah.
was listening to it, so he went for like
No,
10,
but
15 minutes on consent. So
but
I
no, no,
think,
but did you no, no, but did you talk? But did you think how he compared
yeah,
ancient slavery with modern day slavery? And he laid a premise, and he said, "From I challenge you from deductive reasoning, you cannot prove it." So here was his premise, and he said, if you can find a contradiction in that, or you can find a fallacy in that, then fair enough. Um, but before I explain that to you, he needs to know basic logic or basic rules of deductive reasoning, that you try to minimize your premise with as least amount of variables as possible. You can add them, you can add multiple variables, but obviously then it just complicates the whole argument. So he goes, so a person is owned and have rights subject to, no, in Islamic slavery. So in Islamic slavery, a person is owned yet has rights. Actually, forget about the own part as well, because I'm actually going by his logic instead of verbatim. But this is what he said. There's no straw manning at all. So in Islamic slavery, a person can have rights subject to the owner's approval. So he goes, okay, so this is Islamic slavery. Now let's compare that with the modern day slavery. A person can have rights. A person works and has rights subject to the corporation's what's the word I used before? Subject to
corporations rules or something.
yes, so corporations consent. So
Yeah.
corporations, however corporation sees it. So he's added like 3 variables. A person can work. Second one is he has rights, and the third one is it's subject to corporations conditions, and in the case of Islam, is subject to their owners' conditions. So there are 3 variables in there. Someone tell this academician
Yeah.
that you've added. Now each of these variables can be unpacked, and it can go in 100 different directions. That's why it's a bad premise. That's not how you set
And
premises.
secondly, you can leave your job at any time. I think Nuria is also there.
Uh,
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
yeah. One
Okay.
more point, but Ghalib, there's another point. And Haris, he said that he prefaced with a Quranic ayat. I forgot the number, but he said that I'm just paraphrasing what he said. He said that if the slave wants to say that I want to be set free, then he is allowed to. It's wajib. That's what his word was, wajib or first. I think he said
That's
wajib.
bull. That's just a
That
lie.
wajib.
That's an
It's a lie.
extreme form of a
No,
lie.
no, that
Because
is wajib for the owner to free her, and then it's part of the Islamic society to free that slave because they
but
have to let the slave become free.
yeah, but
But
Dali, I have to counter this point here.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So because there is a tradition in Islam where the laundries or the slave girls had to do prostitution to pay off their to buy their freedom.
Really?
There are more than
No, no,
yeah.
I can see that point. I can see that point because he says that.
Yeah, Haris, yes. Dali, you please don't do this. Let me complete. Basically, Haris, what used to happen was that there is this provision where you can sell a slave its freedom. Then that slave would have to, let's say that slave is working for you in the day. And in the night, they can do some other job and earn some money and pay to you and give that money to you in installments. And let's say after a year or two of that, you can
They bought their freedom. So
you
I know
got their
Romans
freedom.
used to. I know
and
Romans used to
and
do it. Yeah.
and Harris,
Yeah.
let me complete one sentence. And the slave girls used to do prostitution to get free, according to this law.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm shocked to hear this. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah.
I was still probably. I'm still
But,
finding it hard to believe. But how would you counter
but
the fact that the Quranic verse that says that? Oh, but I think you would probably say that says that a man, the owner, should not force her to prostitute herself. But if she does it willingly,
If she,
but how can she
yeah,
have? But how can she have? Oh, but you're saying that that's a special allotment of that law, or there's a little loophole allowed for it.
so
That if you
if
want to buy.
if it was wajib for the slave owner to free the slave whenever a slave or a slave girl wants to get freedom, why is there this provision then that a slave or slave woman can buy their freedom? Because if freedom was absolutely guaranteed, if someone wanted to get free, then why did this Islamic slavery survive till the 20th century? Even in the 21st century, it still exists in parts of Africa. In countries like Mauritania, where it is officially banned, but there are still slaves that are working on plantations and in brothels and everywhere. Still, they're working there. They only abolished
Wow.
slavery in 2012, Mauritania.
yeah,
Officially,
we know
abolished
that.
it,
Yeah.
and still it exists there.
I've seen documentaries on these the people that are trying to come to Europe, how they're enslaved in Africa as well, in Northern Africa and Libya and other places. But Ghalib, again, the point is that they're saying that when you make them a slave, they are giving a consent. That's the number one point. So they
That's
consensually are in part of that.
that's just pure bullshit. That's an effing lie. That's all. Yeah, that's a lie. And these Maulvis are just too shameless because they would tell any lie to safeguard Islam and to protect the personality of Muhammad. Because when you tell everything about Islam and Muhammad in the light of truth, everything just falls apart.
And then he gave
So,
example
sorry,
of
sorry. How
Yeah,
can a
Nuria is
slave
there.
consent? How
Yeah,
can a
yeah.
slave consent? There is an implied
That's
element
a
of
lie.
duress because of
Yeah.
the slave-master relationship. How is that ever a valid consent?
no, because he's saying that they once their leaders are doing a war, then they know that that's going to happen if they lose. Because the same would
No,
have happened to
that's
the
not.
Yes.
That's
or
those
vice
are
Hello,
not
versa.
guys.
the terms of a war.
I
That
agree.
you'll
I understand.
capture the
I'm
sex
just saying their
slaves.
logic. And then they're saying that we at this age cannot understand what those age rules were, and you cannot apply today's morality on that time or whatever
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is.
because it serves their
Yeah,
religion.
but
That's
that
why they
is
want
yeah.
to.
and there
That's
were
just
plenty of other armies that obviously did mistreated prisoners of war and things like that, but not everybody had this model of going out and capturing war booty and sex slaves. That was strictly like a very Islamic thing. Even the yeah, I mean, even in
Well,
Rome and
so
Greece, you don't see it extending to sex slavery in the same way we see it in Islam. Like there were slaves, sure, even
no,
the
they
transatlantic slave trade was a lot to do with slave labor, but sex slavery, this concept of a
was the
harem or
offshoot.
this concept of exactly.
Right. That's a good point. So basically, but there were slave owned, I mean, brothels run by slave girls, but I see your point. I think you're emphasizing the fact that the main motive behind that was to obtain slave labor. For example, in Greco-Roman civilization, the whole point was that they anyone who would actually go out and capture. This is how their generals actually fueled or financed their wars. Julius Caesar was the most famous out of all of them, and they would go to these distant lands, and they would win the war at the back of the Roman military.
And they would prefer their slaves to be like these toned, strong men who could perform and do slave
But I
labor.
think-
And then the women that were employed were largely employed in like domestic capacities, as opposed
I
to
think it's difficult to
immediately
establish.
having a sexual
And
element.
the most ugliest face of Islamic slavery is the castrations that they performed on men. You know,
Exactly.
why there are no African populations in the Arabic world, even though they practiced even more slavery than the Western world and even America? Because they castrated all the men. That's why there are no
Exactly.
black, there are no African slaves. There are no African populations in these countries. That's why.
It's funny. It's
So-
funny. It's funny, Dali.
Yeah.
It's a very good point, because Dali actually, if you were listening to the stream, he actually made that academician.
That's
paraphrasing
comedian,
his point.
you know. That's
discussing
he's a
what you
comedian,
said.
not an
Point here.
academician.
He
Can I
said-
make just one quick point?
Can I finish my point?
Yes, sure.
Because he said he was actually giving this presentation, and he was saying, look, you know, these pro-Westerner and these anti-Islamic people, they see liberals like us. He was saying that, you know, what are you proud of? The transatlantic slave labor. And he was saying that throughout the 17th and 18th century, the population of Africa only grew by like so and so percentage. I haven't been able to verify that, but let's just go with it. There could have been other reasons as well, because you know, the diseases and famine and everything. But fair enough. Let's just go with the point. But you just made a very good point, Ghalib. At least the population at least maintained itself or grew by 1 or 2%. Here, you don't see any black people in Africa, in the Arab world, because you just
you castrated all of them. You castrated all of them, and the black women were not even desired there. A lot of black men, but the black women were not desired. The Slavs and those women were more desired. The ones with the blonde hair.
Ghalib, I have a point. There are African Saudis. I have of African descent. I've met them.
but
There are.
they're very few.
I don't know.
They
Like,
would be there. They would be there
are.
for some different reason, not slaves.
Also, are they considered real Saudis by the Saudis?
They're Saudi nationals, and I was surprised one time. I was at a restaurant, at a Moroccan restaurant, and this guy could speak Arabic very well, a black guy, and I said, like, man, are you from like Maghrib, like meaning from Tunisia? He said no. No, I'm from Saudi Arabia, and that's the only time I've seen a Saudi guy working at a restaurant. I said, oh, okay, but but I've seen other like.
He's
there are
definitely
other
not
bits,
Saudi then, because Saudis don't work in restaurants as waiters. Trust me.
Yeah,
No, I know that.
that's,
I know that. I was really surprised. But Ghalib, another point. Even in the transatlantic slave trade, the most slave trade was happened in Brazil, by the way, not even in America. And second point, the white slave owners did impregnate a lot of the females. That's why if you look at the genetic DNA of a lot of the black people in America, African Americans, it's like 25% European descent. They did impregnate a lot of them. So there was a lot of rape happening here as well, as far as like I understand. Like if you go back into the history.
Okay, well, I just did a quick search, but there might be something. It says that 10% of Saudis are Afro-Saudis, which is about 35 million people. And it says, unlike in the Americans, well, obviously, I'm just looking at
35
Wikipedia.
million? Haris, no, 35 million.
No, sorry.
3.5 million.
Yeah, 3.5 million, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just they screwed up here, but it's 10%. So 3.5 million out of 35 million. So that's how it makes it 10%. So unlike the Americas of the 19th century, slaves in the Middle East were allowed to own land, and their children were generally not born into slavery. Also, conversion to Islam precluded further servitude and gave freedom. So basically, if they converted to Islam, then the next generation would be free, and that's because 3.5 million is fairly decent.
What about the slaves who were already Muslims?
Yeah, look, I'm sure it would have developed over
I think
time.
Haris-
I'm not an
Haris-
expert, so
I think we should push it more into the English spoken. I think we should make this issue of slavery mainstream in the English speaking audience as well, because we have made it. For the Urdu speaking and the Hindi speaking audience, this has become one of the most hottest issues. They are like totally on the back foot.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
we should drag it more into the English sphere as well.
Well, I think in the English sphere, there are a lot of AP, and I think English audience is actually quite educated on this. But I think, yeah, you're right. This wokeism culture, they probably need to be shown that. Hang on a second, you're getting in bed with the devil. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Ghalib and Haris, there's one more point that he said that he gave an example of Hazrat Javeria, who was captured by another guy. I don't know, another Sahabi gave the name, and then Javeria said that she does not want to be enslaved, and she was set free.
Not Javeria, it was Safiya.
Maybe Javeria, I don't know, and maybe I could be mixing names. So and then one of them married the Holy Prophet. And then their point was that Muslims, when they enslaved, they made them, and then he said that, okay, even if the owner, the slave girl who gave a consent to become the master of the slave owners, like whatever, I don't know the exact word for it. And then he said that those women were not wives, but they had more rights than a mistress and everything. And eventually, like within a generation or two, they became the part of the
it was Javeria.
He gave the example of one of the kings.
Javeria is right.
It was Javeria. That's what he said. So he said that the way they enslaved, were eventually making those enslaved people the part of the society. That was the point. Do we have like that? That's what he was emphasizing, and Kaisa Raja was also trying to.
It doesn't matter. I think those guys are
That's
not
the best
known.
Allah can do. That's how Allah assimilates people into society.
By making them slaves and
go through this whole slave master relationship, give this fake consent that they can't even give, and be captured in this war, and suddenly like that's Allah's solution to assimilate them.
That's like saying that the Ukrainian women who are being raped today in this war gave consent for this rape.
Yeah, exactly.
Because this war was basically forced on them. Yeah.
Oxymoronic. It makes no sense. They've given consent in this battle.
Yeah. These guys are just
also
okay.